Let's see, I've had a chance to meet just about everybody here, but I'm Quincy Chapman, and I'm the Assistant Director of Housing for Leadership and Education. And I'd say from the time that I was very young, have been very interested in the role of gender in people's lives. I think the reason that I became very aware of it is I grew up in a family or a household where there were no males in the house except for me. My dad was gone by the time I was very young, and so it was me and my two sisters and my mom. And so what happened in my household it became very clear to me that what happened in my household was not the societal norm, that the roles in my home and in terms of how things got divided, in terms of how we operated our household and what we talked about and what we did were very different than other people's homes. It was so powerful that when my mom started dating again, so all of her boyfriends, when I was in junior high, high school, they'd leave at about 8 o'clock from our house, or 9 o'clock. So when I would go spend the night at other people's houses, their dads would still be in the house at like 9 o'clock, and I'd be staring at them like, don't you have somewhere to be? Why are you still here? It was just really bizarre to me to watch all kinds of behavior. And it's always been very interesting for me because when I would gather with especially groups of men or boys when I was younger, and it just never felt like a lot of the stuff that was going on resonated very well with me. And so I always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. So I've always been interested when a particular book came out, which it's very much pop psychology, not based on a lot, but it made a lot of common sense to people. It was called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and it was based upon the idea that the way that we've been socialized to behave makes it feel like sometimes our two genders were born in different experiences, and they interact with one another, but a lot of times there's a lot of miscommunication. Some of it can be very amusing, but some of it not so amusing at all. And how can we come to understand one another a little better? Now, the other thing that's happened, though, since that book came out, because that book's been around for a while, is that book came out during a time where we were really still viewing gender in a binary fashion. So there are a few caveats I want to talk about today, because we're going to talk about gender and how it operates in terms of how we've been taught to behave with one another and also inside our same gender groups. But also understand that these kinds of generalizations that we're going to talk about today can be problematic, because each time you talk about a generalization, you're going to find a significant part of our population that just doesn't buy it, right? It doesn't fit them. It feels weird when you put that gender shirt on, and it doesn't fit all the time. And so the generalizations can be problematic, and you always have to think about yourself, okay, yes, I see the pattern, but is it true for this person? Is it true for that person? How can I make sure I don't make assumptions? But the patterns can be really instructive, because when you can look at how is it that we've come to start to behave, and then understand why when we get in mixed gender groups, sometimes things don't go the way we'd like, you can sometimes look at that pattern and learn a lot from it. The second is that, like I described, gender is much more fluid than we first believed. So this idea of a gender binary, of you're either male or you're female, is very confining, okay? And then the other thing that we'll talk about real quickly is we're not going to talk about biology, okay, which is do you have male parts or female parts? Instead, we're going to talk about the social roles that are connected with whether you have those parts, okay, which is about gender. And then lastly, socialization is powerful. So one of the things we'll talk a lot about today is what's it like to live in a system that has a set of rules even when you don't buy all of the rules, okay? Because sometimes in order to be able to get things done, you have to understand the rules even though they don't work for everybody, okay? So we'll talk about, well, then what do you do? How do you make that work? Okay, but to get us started, we're going to do a little bit of a group exercise. Okay, we're going to have the groups share with one another a little bit, and hopefully what we'll see is a couple of things that will emerge in terms of patterns as you look at the lists in regard to people that identify with more of a female gender identity in those on the other side. So what I'd like for the groups to do is just to talk about in general, okay, and maybe point out two things. One is those things that hit your list that seem like they sort of fit the sort of societal normative behavior for a gender, okay, and then also those that seemed a bit more neutral. In other words, you'd find them in both lists, okay. So as you go through, go ahead and share with the group. Let's talk about, and I'm sorry in this particular presentation, I have to constantly think about using gender terms when a lot of times we use them interchangeably, so women versus female, etc. I'm probably going to wind up doing that a bunch, and I apologize. So, but let's talk about women first, then we'll talk about men, okay? So, who wants to share? General patterns that kind of came out of both lists, and those that look more neutral. Go ahead.
For general patterns, I would say that a lot of them are similar for college students, as far as like being stressed out about money and work and school and health. Yeah, like because we're all coming from that like standpoint of life right now. But then we're talking about differences as well.
Yeah.
And then some of the stark contrast, at least for stressors, for females, like having that need to act like choosing between career, family, being passive enough. Are you like, and like with romantic relationships, but on the flip side, for men having to worry about like not being able to be sensitive, or also like making the first move, paying for dates and stuff like that. But
okay.
Also big stressors.
Okay, excellent. And this group?
For us, in terms of commonalities, we had relationships as a stressor for both groups. And then for differences, we decided that, you know, for men, having a sense of masculinity was, you know, very important, that you were compelled to try and be as athletic or muscular as possible.
Okay. It also kind of hit on how men sort of have a more competitive nature typically, or like stereotypically, and women are more emotional or not afraid to show that emotion.
Okay.
It's more acceptable, I guess,
okay.
in society.
Would you say that it's fair in the lists that men have been socialized to be driven more toward individualism and achievement, when women more toward relational and connection kinds of things, and that they get judged based upon their capacity for doing either of those things well? And so, you know, so if you're a guy who's born in a jockey's body, okay, so you've got some things that are going to be difficult for you to do in order to meet a stereotypic masculine kind of ideal. However, there are other ways to achieve, right? So then you'll see. So let's talk about that sort of expectation of men a little bit in terms of achievement. What are some ways that you see men behave in order to be able to show their mastery or show their ability to achieve something that may not necessarily be always about sort of being the most masculine person? They're just about being the best or better, or
you could say in the business world, the incredible competitiveness that you see among predominantly male group of people.
okay.
Cutthroat business tactics and everything.
Okay, good example. What other kinds of things?
I feel like even in like groups of friends with guys, a lot of times you just see them always trying to one-up each other,
Yeah.
which you don't so much get with girls.
Right, and back in the day we called those your mama jokes. Those probably aren't around anymore, but you get the idea. So yeah, what else? It's the whole reason for video games. Video games without the ability to show mastery or need to be better than somebody else or better than artificial intelligence would go nowhere, right? So, and by and large, yes, there are lots of females out there in the world in terms of numbers who like video games, but percentage-wise, not so high, right? And the reason for it is different, that it's very difficult to develop a relational connection to a video game, although there's some efforts to try these days. So not so good. Okay, so let's talk about women a little bit, about this socialization and push toward relationship. How does that play out in terms of what you see women do in order to create some kind of a relational connection? What does it look like? What kinds of activity and behavior does that result in?
I feel like you see a lot of women being pressured to give up like career aspirations or something like that to start a family, or just for a relationship in general. You always see the woman following the man.
Right.
Somewhere, not always, but you
Yeah.
tend to feel that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions or other ideas? I think you'll see a lot of, and again, we have to use a bit of stereotype here to show it, but if you just look at choice of movies, if you get a group of men together, what kinds of movies are they going to watch versus a group of women? You'll see that there's different gendered patterns in terms of those kinds of things. And then, a lot of the pressures. So for instance, before I was married, I could count on one hand the number of times I was ever asked when I was going to get married. So, because I was male. So people just sort of assumed that my future related to relationships was whatever I chose it to be, and there could be multiple paths, but all of them were equally valid. My wife, before she got married, was asked, I'd say, one time a day through her life when she got married, especially as she approached a certain age. So very different kinds of behavior and expectation regarding different things. Let's talk about some things. So, one of the other things that I wanted to do, but we may run out of time, so let's not do it. I was going to have you, but I'll share with you what I was going to have you do. I was going to have you write down, you're going to begin with an assumption that it's a heterosexual couple, a male and a female, were in an argument. Okay? And I was going to have you brainstorm as a group what the argument was likely to be about, and write maybe three sentences from the script on either side of what the male was saying and what the female was saying inside the relationship. So we've seen enough of the scripting in the world to know what that might look like. But so since we don't have time to sort of do it as groups, if you were to guess what would the conversation or conflict likely be about, what would one guess be between a heterosexual couple, one's male, one's female? What are fights usually about in college between dating couples?
Maybe jealousy or something.
Okay, so jealousy, number one. Okay, and then share with me one phrase that would come out of the. Okay, well let's for this exercise because it'll make it easier. Who's the jealous one?
I'd say probably both.
It could be both.
Yeah.
Okay, but in this case, who is it? Just it doesn't matter.
The girl.
Okay, that's going to help us. Okay, so the girl is jealous. Okay. And what is, give me a piece of dialogue that's coming out of her mouth when she's saying something to the guy relative to jealousy.
Why do you always text this other girl?
And his likely response is,
We're friends.
okay, or,
Because we have class together.
okay,
Trust me?
why don't you trust me? Excellent. Or it could also be, actually, I don't always text her. I texted her once. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, and then her response is?
Show me your phone.
Okay, good. Okay, so the reason I ask about that is men and women, we talked about interest and what they value. And what I want to do, let's see, there's a number of concepts I want to sort of do all at once here. But communication. Okay, so let's talk about communication a little bit. In general relational patterns, this is actually borne out by research. Women communicate in metaphor, superlative, and story. Okay? And men communicate linearly, and then this is circular. Men communicate linearly and literally. Now, are there poets who are men? Yes, there are poets who are men. Can men communicate in these ways? Obviously, everybody can. But when you look at the patterns, these kinds of things happen. So when you see male and female argue together, it's really sort of fascinating watching how that will happen, because women will say things like, you never call. Okay? And then he responds, and does she mean literally you never call? No, because they've actually had phone conversations, right? So it's been done. And he will respond, well, actually, we talked last night. Okay, what is she saying when she says you never call?
I wish you would call me more.
Wish you would call me more, and if you dig a little deeper, what she really mean?
You don't call enough.
What's that?
You don't call enough.
You don't call enough, which means?
Why didn't you call?
Which means?
Why don't you
What
love
were you
me?
doing?
Why don't you love me? Why am I not important? I don't fit into. Okay, so if you dig deeper, what you never call means I don't factor highly enough in your life, okay, or things like that, okay. Now he doesn't hear that. Instead, he hears you never call. He focuses in on never, and he goes to prove why that's incorrect, right? Is this conversation going anywhere? Absolutely not. So the important thing about communication between men and women is that men have to understand to listen for the theme, okay? And to not listen for the surface theme, but what's digging under there. And then on the flip side, women have to understand this need for men to sort of take things one step at a time and talk about the specifics, and don't paint them in a corner where that's all that they can see is this sort of proof that what's been said is inaccurate. So, okay. So this happens a lot in organizations too. So when you get together with men and women inside an organization, you will find some expectations about how the group's going to communicate. So if you get a bunch of guys in there and the agenda isn't being followed in sort of a lockstep, fairly orderly fashion where they know exactly what's coming next, you'll see that they start to stress out a little bit. On the flip side, if there's not enough time spent in a meeting connecting with one another, then women don't see the point of having been in the meeting because they could have gotten the information if we're just going to cover an agenda in an email, right? So there's a piece of that of being able to serve both groups' needs as you move through. My favorite example of communication between men and women is if you ever walk down the sidewalk behind a group of, let's say, 4 women. I don't know if you've ever observed this, but they'll be walking along and all 4 of them are actually all talking at the exact same time, carrying on 3 different themes of conversation, all understanding what the other people are saying. And I go into gear lock. Like I can't even, I've lost track of one track of communication. I can't do it. I try. But so inside a group, you'll notice that women are just very adept at just sort of having these cross-fertile conversations, one building on another. They don't care if everyone's not listening to them. This drives guys crazy. Is if they're talking, they want to have the floor, okay? And they want all the heads in the audience to be paying attention to what that is. Causes them a lot of stress when that doesn't happen. On the flip, men, and this is the other thing. Women communicate face-to-face, men communicate side-to-side. So I don't know if you've ever been in a room where you keep turning to face a guy, and then he keeps turning because you're facing him nose to nose, and so he needs to be on your side. And so you keep turning to face him, and you guys keep doing this dance because he wants to be side to side. It's a really fascinating thing, and it's even worse when it's 2 guys. They don't face one another. Okay, so my best example of that is 2 guys fishing. Okay. This is the best possible scenario because the river or the lake is there. Okay, you both have to face it. There's no reason to look at one another. Even better if you never speak to one another. You just fish. You stand there all day, never talking to one another. Okay, and you think that you're the best friends in life, even though you've never exchanged words. And women can't fathom that this would happen, but men are very comfortable in that kind of scenario. Okay. We talked a little bit about interests and things like that, and let's talk about motivation. So men are motivated by feeling needed. Women are motivated. Now this is the word of the author, and I'm going to show you his word, and then I'm going to show you mine. He said feeling cherished. I don't like this word. Feels too much like up on the pedestal business. I'm going to change this word to feeling valued. The interesting thing about this one is women want to feel valued based upon no performance of any kind, just because they are. Okay, just because of who they are. Okay, it's a given. I am alive, therefore I'm valuable, and I want you to value me. Men do not believe in that value without action, so they want to feel needed. Okay, so it's a constant pressure to prove themselves in some kind of way to show that without me, you won't have something that otherwise you would have had. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is we don't recognize how absolutely replaceable we are, right? Because a lot of the things that each of us can do, the other guy can do too, right? So, so this is stressful to us. So it's this constant need to prove that we're important because we're needed. So when we look at the interests and the activities, where do you see those patterns unfold? And then the second question, we talked about wanting to talk about where the pattern fits and where it doesn't. So first, let's talk about where do we see on your interest lists those play themselves out. Anyone have the willing to share with the group? Anything that you see? Yeah.
When we worked on the more like societal based views, we got some of the things that fall under motivational categories. So for like men feeling needed for things that they like might stress about or care about, would be like if they're muscular enough, or like things like if they have enough money or things like that, versus women like wanting to have like relationships and
Okay.
stuff.
Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts? It's a particular also difficult time during college when you're sort of in sort of a limbo, right? A life limbo, right? So you're developing as a person, you're coming up with all kinds of new ways to think about your identity, what you want life to be, etc. But you're also sort of in a limbo in terms of production, what that next step of life is going to be. And so when you look at men feeling needed, there's not a lot of areas in which they're seen as someone who's going to provide something right now, right? It might come later. And so that's a really challenging time. But once career comes and this stereotypic idea of providing for a family, wanting to do whatever that is, then it becomes easier for them to at least conceive of how that might happen. Okay, good. Let's talk about conflict a little bit, because men and women deal with stress in different ways. And they also kind of approach problems in different ways. Gotta go back to my note so I remember the right term. Okay. So when women feel stress and they don't know what to do with the stress that they feel, what do they tend to do? With who?
Their friends.
Their friends, sometimes family. Okay, and how does that talk go? What are women looking for when they talk about their stress?
Sometimes you just need to get it out.
You just need to get out. So basically you're looking only for a listening ear, usually, right? So when you have a friend who is listening to what's stressful to you, what do you expect from them? How do you want them to behave?
Empathy.
Empathy?
You want to feel validated in your, in whatever's bothering you, whatever's stressing you out.
Could you share a phrase that you would like to hear from a friend who's showing empathy?
Jeez, I don't know.
Wow, that's tough.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. The other reason I love this is there's a word sorry in the English language that men hate the word sorry because they don't understand that it has multiple meanings. To men, sorry means I did something wrong, which is against mastery and feeling needed, right? I just screwed up, which decimates me in your view in terms of my ability to contribute. Women understand that sorry is an empathetic word, okay? It shows empathy. I'm sorry that happened to you, okay? Which is a way of saying, I haven't experienced it, so I can't really sympathize, but It's terrible that it happened, and I can empathize. Okay, so women talk. Okay, men do what's called going to the cave. Okay, and the cave it's more of an emotional, psychological place. But as men get older, it tends to become a physical place as well. So how many of you have dads that have the man cave, the den, the garage, the shop? Okay, it seems that over time, men always find some sort of physical cave space to retreat to. And there's some rules about the cave. One is it's his cave and his cave alone. Only one person is allowed in the cave, and that's him. And he sets a dragon out in front of the cave so that if anyone attempts to invade the cave, the dragon scorches whoever comes at them. So when you think about behavior, and when a guy is stressed and he goes to his cave, what does that dragon look like? How does it play out? What's it sound like? Anger, okay. And what kinds of things do they say? It might be leave me alone. It might be give me some space. You hear that one a lot, etc. So, and it's funny, one of the things that I have found over time is that the cave is one of the areas where you'll see that women have caves too. And they tend to be more introspective pursuits and things like that. The difference is the amount of time that men versus women can spend in that cave. If there weren't bodily functions that needed to be attended to, men could be in a cave for a long time. So, so that becomes really important. So in our house, how that plays out is Meredith recognizes that there are certain pursuits that I have that have absolutely zero value to the household, right? I still love to play computer games, and she recognizes that that's how I just sort of blow off steam. I just like to go be left alone for a little while, etc. And that if I don't get that time, in sort of significant enough chunks, that creates a problem for us down the line. Then I'm constantly seeking it, and then that doesn't work out well. Okay, so the cave versus talking. Now, because each of us tends to deal with stress in a particular pattern, we expect that everyone in the world would relate to stress in the same way we do. So when a guy assumes that, when a man assumes that a woman in his life is going to want to go to a cave when she's stressed, okay, what is the likely end result? How's that going to play out when he believes that she's just going to be left alone?
She gets upset.
Yeah. And vice versa, when she believes that he's going to want to talk about his problems or what's stressing him, what happens? Same thing, right? Yeah. Okay? And then the interesting thing is that when they sometimes do sit down to talk, there's two ways of attacking it. So stress is typically caused by some kind of an event, activity, problem, and people don't know how to deal with it. Now, women's approach to problems when they run across problems is what's called the Home Improvement Committee. The important part of this is it's a committee, okay, which connotes multiple people all sort of thinking about something together, right? So if there's a problem in life, you get together, your closest friends, you all sort of talk about it for a while. And what does that talk look like?
Collaborative brainstorm.
Okay, brainstorm. Okay. Does the committee come up with a single solution at the end? No. Whose responsibility is to come up with a solution?
The person who's stressed.
The person who's stressed, right? And it may happen soon and it may not. So the committee's only job is to do what?
Support.
Support. Yep. And maybe offer a few different approaches, or a lot of times what this will look like is the sharing of a personal story that is somewhat similar. Guys, on the other hand, are going to attack a problem. They're going to put on their Mr. Fix-It hat. Okay, so a problem arrives, and the very first thing that comes to mind that seems like a reasonable solution to your friend, who's a guy, he's going to tell you what that is. Well, what you simply need to do is this, and then it'll all be better. And so, same thing. When the two groups come at it with a particular kind of pattern, then there's a sort of a constant sort of lack of connection between the two groups as they attempt to do it. And the interesting thing, though, about guys is that Mr. Fix-It is one-directional. They're allowed to offer a solution, but remember what they need is they need mastery and to show that they know how to do things. They do not like to hear the solution back from somebody else. So there's an interesting dichotomy there in that we seek quick solutions, but we want to come up with them, and we struggle when someone tells us what we should be doing. Okay, let's talk about intimacy. And intimacy is important because when we're working in groups, it's important that we feel connected to groups. And so this isn't romantic intimacy necessarily. In intimacy, men are like rubber bands, and women are like waves. So this one I'm not sure if I buy, but this comes from the author. What he says is, in terms of relationships and connection with one another, women will feel positive about a relationship that they're in for an amount of time. And regardless of whether there's an event or something that happens to change the way they feel about a relationship, they will simply start to feel different about it over time. So if you look at it in terms of a wave, they'll feel very positive, more positive about a relationship. They'll learn more about one another, and things will feel really good until they just plain can't feel any better than that. And then all of a sudden, in sort of without explaining it, it will start to feel not as good. People will feel distant, less intimate, less connected, until they can't feel any less connected, really, and they want to preserve the relationship. They start feeling positive about it over time. So in a less sort of less connected to events, more just I feel good about it, I don't feel good about it. I feel good about it, I don't feel good about it. Men, on the other hand, are so focused on this need for personal individualism, personal connection, mastery, they're like rubber bands. I should have brought a rubber band so that I could show it to you, but where they just sort of, so if this is the relationship that they're in, it can be a relationship with a person or not. If they feel too much like I'm swallowed in this relationship, I don't see myself as an individual anymore, disconnected from the relationship, they stretch like a rubber band, and they stretch and they stretch and they stretch until there's enough tension. They were like, oh, okay, if I stretch any farther, this relationship would be severed. I sort of see myself, I find myself again, and then they stretch, then they come back and reconnect, and they stretch and they reconnect. So what John Gray, the author, had said is, what men will try to do is, when they see that there's someone in their life that they're in a relationship with is not feeling really positive about the relationship, they do two things. One is they try to fix it, which doesn't work. The other is that they don't recognize that this is just sort of a natural course of life, and you just have to ride it out. And that it's not because of something that you necessarily did, it's just a matter of being patient, listening, being thoughtful, and eventually things right themselves. On the flip, when women are in a relationship with men, because of their need for connection, understanding, being empathetic, they never let the tension develop inside that rubber band. So he'll try to move from the relationship to stretch the band, and instead she'll follow. And there's never any stretch. And so when there's no stretch, then he keeps running, she keeps following to show connection and relationship. So, I don't know, do you buy that one? I don't either. So what I do recognize, however, and I feel this less the older that I am, what I do recognize is that there are a lot of times where we just can't explain why in relationships things just don't feel 100% perfect all the time. And a lot of times it's not based upon something that somebody did. It's just over time we just start to feel differently. There are lots of things in life that make us do that, and that the solution isn't in a solution. It's in being patient. So, because I think that happens regardless of what he was saying about the model. Okay. Let's see. So, we talked about this idea of dealing with stress and dealing with problems and the ways that we've been trained to do it. Let's talk about our student organizations a little bit. What are the ways that, that we've set up our sort of traditional organizations that tends to satisfy sort of more normative needs for men and women? So inside any organization that you're in, what's a sort of an organizational behavior that you do that that might meet one group's need versus another?
Well, in NRH and NRH as well, we meet in committees. So,
Okay.
Going to the women.
Yeah.
I would say an organization having a power structure meets the hierarchical
Okay.
needs of a man.
Probably like the agendas and the Parley Pro is more into men.
Yeah.
Any sort of like opening question, like what's your name and your favorite color?
Okay. Other thoughts?
If you do socials outside of meeting time.
Okay. And what the socials look like then become important, don't they? Because if it's a bowling competition, it's one. And if it's something else, it's something else, you know. So, okay, good. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about where it's, okay, so the big lesson here is, well, there are a couple. One is when you're thinking about how you structure your organizations, do you vary your approach enough? And especially if you look at your organization and you recognize that you've got a real imbalance in terms of participation by men and women, there might be a reason for that. And so just to think critically about, you know, have we set ourselves up to just sort of keep a certain group of people interested versus another? The other one is when conflict arises, to use multiple approaches to make sure that everyone has their need met. But finally, let's think about this whole model a little bit more critically. Think about your own experience and where the patterns don't fit. In other words, where do you see yourself move outside of these models? And then the second part of that is, and does that make you feel that you necessarily feel any less as part of a gender identity, or is it just, you know, it's just not part of my personality? I still, for instance, maybe I feel very male still, but I just don't buy this, or it doesn't fit for me. Any thoughts?
Well, when friends come to me with a problem, I feel as though I usually like to have a way to fix it. I don't like when people say sorry to me just because sorry that happened. I'm just like, well, it's not your fault. And I know, I'm just sorry it happened to you. Sorry, but I think it just kind of makes me listening to this thing yeah, I definitely see in a lot of ways I communicate more stereotypically like a man. I think that probably comes from being raised by a dad with a brother, how you were in a house with a lot of women, I was with a lot of men. But I think it really just gives me a kind of a unique perspective and allows me to understand people a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
I grew up with two brothers and my dad. My mom I went to work with my dad and stuff, so I grew up and I'm super competitive, and that always gets noted about me being competitive. But if I'm with a group of guys who are equally competitive, they'll just point out that I'm competitive.
They're not used to it. Yeah.
Right? Well, no, but by my girlfriend,
oh, sure.
That are I'm I don't know, things like that. How I feel even if I was on the same level of competitiveness as my male friend, it'd be pointed out by my female friends that I'm competitive.
Yeah.
I feel like not just me, but a lot of girls also really like agendas and structure. Maybe it's mostly just me, but I feel like there are a lot of people that really like structure, so I can definitely see how you might see that more generally in men, but I think there are a large percentage of women who like that structure as well.
Absolutely. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think sometimes I think of things as a structural change and not just a one-way solution to things.
Good. Any other thoughts? Well, in closing, one thing to remember is that most of this, I mean, if you look at anthropological study and biological study, you'll recognize that, You know, there were reasons many eons ago why certain things happened, right? So there was some stratification in terms of how males and females did certain kinds of work based upon, you know, whether dinosaurs were going to eat them or not, right? And whether offspring needed to be created. But the world has moved so far beyond the need to fight off dinosaurs, right? So a lot of things have changed. And all of these things over time have been socially constructed. The beautiful thing about that is that means that a lot of the things that can be constructed don't have as much value or need anymore. And instead, that allows for a lot of fluidity in terms of how we can determine or decide to solve problems. On the micro level, when we're trying to sort of operate as individuals, that fluidity has a lot to do with your level of comfort, your willingness to sort of step outside what societal roles might say, and a lot to do with your confidence and things like that. On a macro level, though, in terms of creating social change to maybe muddy the water on some of the ways that we do these things, how does that happen? Yeah.
I think it might tie back to Katie's speech of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and just like not being afraid to voice what you really are feeling or thinking and why. And like the stresses we have that were more gender based, just like enabling, like by being what you want to do, you're enabling other people to do the same.
Yeah, good. Other thoughts?
I think also calling out, like if you see, if someone, like, you know, if someone reacts to a way that, something that you do and it's like, maybe, that's what I'm looking for, like in a way that like society would view it like, you should have done this or you should have done this, like calling that out and just being, well, why do you think that? Like, you know, it really doesn't have to be like that, just calling those inconsistencies out where you see them.
Yeah, good. And I think the other thing is that when we recognize that people behave in a way that's not consistent with normative behavior, in other words, what society has said is supposed to be that way, to check ourselves and one another when that isn't seen as valid. So we have all kinds of examples of, you know, what we call women who show assertiveness, what we call men who don't, etc. And to really understand that those types of behaviors in terms of naming people when they're behaving in ways that are comfortable for them, it may not be normative in the binary. It's just really not valuable anymore to do that. And so to call that out too. Okay, any other thoughts? Well, thanks for playing along. And hopefully it doesn't feel so much like we were born on different planets.